Hello, my name is Kai, and I am a bit of a rambler. I like to travel, learn, and tell stories. And while I had the episode about the Wicklow Way and walking from the north to south of Ireland, that was only maybe 2 weeks of my whole trip there, which was a couple months, I think, or maybe 3 months, I'm not sure. But it was a pretty long trip, and that entire hammock camping portion of it only lasted up to 2 weeks. And a whole lot of other stuff went on. So I'm going to get into the urban camping part of it, where I hammock camped around different cities. And the other stuff, just living in the cities and hostels and with friends, and what went on while I was in Ireland. However, I did leave off the hammock camping story with the last thing that happened to me, which was when the Scottish rugby team showed up. I had been walking around Waterford looking for the right bar, and I went to a bunch of different places, and a couple of every Irish pub is great. The worst Irish pub I was at in Ireland is better than the best bar I've ever been to in the States. They're quiet affairs. There's not loud music playing. There's always hardwood everywhere. There's nearly always live music playing, both modern and traditional music. A lot of the pubs are hundreds of years old. And Irish people drinking in pubs, I should say, are very quiet and private, and they have conversations, and it's a communal spot to hang out. It is a public house. So I really like that, and I got Guinnesses at a lot of these places. And the place I went to was right on the corner of a busy intersection in Waterford near the water, so I think it was a little more touristy and was trying to be a little more modern than a lot of the pubs I was at. Maybe this was an ale house instead. I don't know, they have a lot of distinctions, and I never learned the distinctions between pubs, between the naming of the pubs. But anyway, I found this pub on the corner, and like I said, it looked nice, but it was a little touristy, so I just kept walking around, and then I started going through all the side streets a couple blocks back from the water of Waterford, and there was like 4 short steps leading down to a door, and it looked like a corner bar, but it was set in the middle of the block. I don't know how to... It was behind a row of houses, and between another row of houses on the other side of the building, there was just this little bar nestled into a hidden courtyard that wasn't really a courtyard. It was just a liminal space, like a forgotten little neighborhood nook. And as soon as I saw it, I was like, ooh, that is the bar I'm going to hang out at. And all my pub memories, for very good reasons, like Guinness, are smushing together. So I'm not sure, but I distinctly remember these 2 pubs. And whichever one I was in for the night, I'm pretty sure it was that quieter one set a couple blocks behind in the hidden courtyard. I got in there, and I had a Guinness and a packet of cheese and onion crisps, really enjoying myself, and this woman and her girlfriend, Neve and Siobhan, I think, or Siobhan, started talking to me, and she asked how to spell her name, Siobhan, and I was like, S-H, no. And I got it totally wrong because it was spelled Irish, S-I-O-B-H-A-N. But we talked about traveling, and they said they like to travel, and it was fun talking to them. And I felt like much less of an imposter chatting with a couple locals that I had made friends with. They both lived like around the corner from this pub, and it was their regular drinking spot. And it was fun. I think I talked with them for a pretty long time, like 90 minutes or something. And then the sun started to go down, and I was like, it's even better to drink Guinness at night. And I had another pint. And then I don't think this is actually how it happened, but what it feels like is the door got kicked in, and there were suddenly 50 people screaming, running, rushing, trampling into the bar, and everybody in the bar looked back and then cheered in roaring unison as the crowd entered. And something cultural was happening, and I don't know, I had no idea what it was. And I had to wait for everyone to calm down before I could ask Neve, why is everyone so excited to see this group of women who just walked in? And again, the details are fuzzy, but it was either the regional or national women's rugby team. And I had never met a rugby team, so that was pretty exciting. And they explained what rugby is, and I remember being pretty interested in rugby because I had caught it on a couple of screens, like in some of the bars when I was hammock camping down here. And it looked like one of the sports I could watch on TV and that would hold my interest. I really prefer playing sports to watching any of them on TV, including all the regular American football or basketball. I get pretty bored with a lot of those. Hockey I can sometimes watch, and I think rugby can be interesting to me for a bit anyway, on screen. But mostly I prefer playing sports to watching them on TV. But a rugby team is impressive. And they were immediately rowdy. And like I said, it wasn't very late. The sun had just set, let's say, an hour ago, so it was still 8, 7. Actually, the sun was setting really early because it was winter time, so it might have been 5:30 or 6 o'clock. But it was pretty early, and the party came in, and everybody got Guinness. That's all everybody just drinks Guinness. They have, like, red ales and everything, but if you're in the bar, everybody just drinks Guinness, which makes sense because that old adage about Guinness tasting better in Ireland and different is 100% true. I couldn't believe how different Guinness tasted when I got to Ireland. I wasn't like, oh my God, but I did sit there in the pub after I got my first Guinness and immediately think, oh, I could drink pints of this. In fact, it was so smooth and easy to drink that I ended up looking up some beer facts and abolished a myth I had carried with me from the States, where everybody knows the joke that drinking Guinness is like eating a loaf of bread and it's the heaviest beer. That's just common cultural knowledge in the States, which is simply not correct. Guinness has 120 calories and Guinness Extra Stout has 140 calories, which is less than Blue Moon and a ton of other just regular light-colored beers. So I really think it's just the dark color of Guinness that makes people think it has so many more calories than any other beer, because it has less or almost the same as most other beers. Any beer, like Bud Light, has 90 calories per pint, and the regular Guinness is only 120. And like I said, Blue Moon is 150, 160 per pint. So it really is just a regular beer. It's just that it's so smooth and malty and dark colored that it's received this legendary reputation in the United States as the heaviest beer in the world. And it's not heavy by any means, by any measurement. I think it just looks so cool. And by virtue of its aesthetic has received that reputation. But that's not what I was talking about with the rugby team. Wait, was it the Scottish national rugby team? Because the girl that I fell in like with, who was a lesbian, and her girlfriend stared angrily at me a lot because we became instant friends and started chatting about traveling and stuff. I was very aware I was not in the running at all for someone who likes girls because I'm not one, but I couldn't help my attraction to her. And also, she was just very easy to talk to and explained some of rugby to me and told me about her life and where she was from in Scotland. Yeah, it must have been the Scottish rugby team. I said that, right? I didn't say the Irish rugby team earlier. It's the Scottish national rugby team. I think that was it. But I could be totally wrong. It was a rugby team, and one of them was from Scotland, I can tell you that. And she explained my complete bewilderment and ignorance about some of the basic fundamentals of rugby. And they had just finished a game. They had just won a game, and that's why they came to the pub to celebrate. And I remember one of the girls I was talking to earlier before, like those two locals I told you about, started hitting on the rugby player that I was talking to. But it was weird. It was in this like sad, lonely way, even though she was there with her girlfriend. I mean, both of them were. The rugby player was with her girlfriend who was on the same team, and then that couple I had met earlier, her girlfriend, the not lonely one, was right on the other side of the bar, but this one was trying to make out. She asked to make out with the rugby player I was talking to. It was a very weird situation, and I had to catch glances from the Scottish rugby player when she talked her down, the civilian, I'll call her, civilian 1, whose civilian 2 girlfriend was across the bar, and let her down gently, and I had to contribute to the conversation and tell her she was pretty, basically tell civilian 1 she was pretty so that she didn't feel so down in the dumps. I think everyone knew her for being emotional when she got wasted, or maybe it was just because she was wasted. But it was a very awkward situation that I got to be a part of. And this is like 7 p.m. now. It's maybe been a couple hours, let's say it's 8 o'clock. So the party is just getting started. And we just keep talking and having fun and drinking Guinness. I get packets of cheese and onion crisps every other Guinness or so. And I was on a pretty strict budget back then. I think a few $100 a month. But I was like, well, this is like the coolest night. I'm going to have in Ireland, hanging out with a rugby team who seems to like me for some reason and is talking to me and letting me hang out with all the locals. So I'm just going to spend whatever it costs to stay here as long as the rugby party goes on. I honestly don't even know if I kept paying for drinks after a certain point. I know I kept drinking, and I know everybody else was drinking, but a mundane task like paying seems to have slipped my mind in the haze. I never left a bar without paying a tab, so I'm sure if I needed to, I did. But it got so crazy so fast. Like, as soon as they came in, like I said, everybody was shouting, and then everybody just kept shouting. Even in the conversations I had, I would have to speak very loudly with the rugby players who were sitting right next to me because everyone in the bar was shouting in exuberance and joy and partying. I saw pictures of the town that rugby player I liked was from in Scotland. Let's call her Anna. And Anna's little town looked like a medieval village, basically. It looked like nothing in the middle of the most beautiful plains and rolling hills I had ever seen. And I decided right then and there to go to Scotland next, which is how I feel every time I see a video of anywhere in the world, pretty much. So I didn't end up going to Scotland, but I certainly will at some point. Whenever I'm next near Europe, Ireland and Scotland are on my list. I'd love to get to Ireland again. And I gotta go to England for the music. But anyway, she showed me all these pictures of her hometown she really liked, and just when she was traveling around Scotland, just telling me how Scotland was the most beautiful country ever. And every single picture she showed me, I was like, this is insane. Like, this is so crazy. I imagined Ireland would look the same if it was summer, because like I said, even in winter, everything was bright and lush and green, and sometimes on a sunny day, it would just look like a beautiful summer day in the Pacific Northwest, like just the greenest area you can imagine. Except Ireland's trees are so much thicker, and lush is the verdant, fertile word for the plants in the Irish countryside. But Scotland certainly had no dearth of beautiful greenery as well, and then they had a bunch of cliffs and beaches. So cool. So I loved all these pictures she was showing me, but then we had to stop because some time had passed, and now it was karaoke time. And music started vibrating the bar. The bassist started shaking everything, and some of the rowdier members of this rugby team were standing up and screaming. There was a microphone at some point, and they were singing a song, but I sort of browned out while everything was happening because it was just such an insane party commotion. And the next clear memory I have is looking up at the stairs, because there was a stairway up to the second floor, and two of the rugby players were up on the stairs, and one of them slung another one over her shoulder and wore her like a feather boa and paraded down the stairs screaming to the lyrics of "Do You Love Me" by the Contours. Do you love me? and she ran up and down the stairs wearing the other rugby player, who at one point was on the landing, dancing herself. But the party was just off the chain. It was crazy. It was one of the craziest parties I'd ever been to, and it was 10, at night by the time my brain caught up to what the heck was happening. And the pub was supposed to close at some point, maybe at midnight. So after the karaoke just went on. It just kept going for hours. And at midnight, everything's supposed to close, but they do lock-ins in Ireland, where the pub just locks the doors. The policemen don't come in and stop you drinking after hours. And the rugby team, and especially the player I had been talking to who had shown me those pictures of Scotland, kind of vouched for me, and they said that I could stay, even though I must have seemed so weird as a loud, confused American boy. But I was just having a great time. I talked to everybody on the team and everybody else in the bar. I know one guy lost his shirt at one point. Nobody ever stopped dancing, basically from the moment the team showed up, but especially after the lock-in, the party just kept going crazy and people were getting less clothed. And by 2 or 3 in the morning, whatever it was, when everybody was finally starting to be partied out, things slowed down a bit. It was still loud and music was playing, people were shouting, but you could just feel, the atmosphere was mellowing out. And the guy behind the counter made butter potato chip, butter crisp sandwiches. So just slices of white bread, smear butter on them, put potato chips inside, put on another piece of white bread. And I was just like, oh, that is disgusting. I never have liked butter much, but Anna convinced me to try a bite, and it was the best thing I've ever eaten, especially with the ever-present pint of Guinness next to me. I devoured 1 or 2 of those butter crisp sandwiches, and so did everyone else. For 5 minutes, everyone was just munching and crunching on these little sandwiches that everyone had, these butter crisp sandwiches. And then we all had a couple more rounds, and then the night was over, and I can see the rugby player who carried the other one on her shoulders like a boa so clearly in my mind, and watch her running up and down the stairs with this other player. It's just a really great memory that I will treasure forever. So I needed to start with that, even though I was in Waterford after Dublin, and a bunch of these other stories in here are from Dublin, because that night lives so large in my mind. But since all that alcohol was also living so large in my mind that night, it might have been Carlow, it might not have been Waterford, might have been another town. I'm really not sure. I remember the party well, but the location, So let's pop back to Dublin. I arrived in Dublin. That was when I still had my tent with me, and I hadn't seriously hammock camped yet. I didn't go on my walk through the Wicklow Way. And I recently remembered that I went to Ireland because a band was playing called Dervish, who sings a lot of traditional Irish tunes. And it was, I think, 4 guys for a while, and then a woman joined them. And her voice is like magical, fairy Irish fairy tale singing voice. She just sings the old Irish ballads so beautifully. And I was in Morocco when I found out they would be playing in Ireland. And Morocco's not too far from Ireland. It's closer to Ireland than most other countries. And even though it was 2 months out, I bought a ticket to Ireland based on that concert. And then I just spent the rest of the time in Morocco waiting to get there. Flew over to Ireland. And I got a hostel first thing so I could explore the city. And man, I really loved Dublin. Dublin is a cool city. Very pretty, very dense city also. As multicultural as you're going to get in such a small monocultural country like Ireland that has, incidentally, pretty strict immigration requirements. I met an Irish guy who told me once that they allow 50 immigrants per year nationally, which I don't know how accurate that is, but that was shocking to even hear. So in Dublin, obviously, the first thing I did was get a Guinness, and like I said, it just tasted better than any Guinness I'd had in my life. And they had a They have the Guinness factory there, but I didn't go on the brewery tour because it seemed a little too touristy. Plus, pubs everywhere had Guinness, and I knew how to make beer. I don't know. Maybe I should have gone on the tour, but it just seemed like a whole bunch of stuff I was fairly familiar with, and I could drink Guinness at any pub right next door to the brewery anyway. Maybe I was being a little hipster about that tour. But I don't really like guided tours in general anyway. I stopped by the National Library to look at the... Oh, no, you know what the first thing I did was? I went to Trinity College because at the moment they had the Book of Kells, which, if you don't know, is this Celtic version of the Bible that has super intricate, tiny drawings around a lot of the pages, around the margins of all of the pages of the Bible. Not all of the pages, but there are several pages that are incredibly intricately designed with little fey creatures and Celtic knots and just super intricate designs all around the text of the Bible. And it was very cool to see in real life because I love a movie called The Secret of Kells, which is sort of a historical fiction about the making of the Book of Kells. And they go into a whole bunch of its history, and I didn't realize that was a real historical artifact. And I'm not even sure how I found out that it was at Trinity College when I was in Dublin. I think I was just looking at all of the different places to go to, and Trinity College was one of them, and it said, Trinity College, comma, home to the Book of Kells, or something to that effect. And I was like, well, wait, is that the Book of Kells from that movie I love? And I went to Trinity College and I looked it up more, and yeah, it was. It's the legendary Book of Kells with these really cool little intricate drawings in all of the margins. And it was frankly amazing seeing the real illustrated pages in real life after I felt like I was so familiar with the book from the movie I saw. That movie, beautiful animation called The Secret of Kells, is very worth watching. A lot of fun, gives interesting history, very emotional. It's a great movie. And it has a lot of the Irish legends inside it. It's great. But seeing the book in real life was also just a very cool experience. I couldn't believe it was real when I saw little drawings in the margins. I was like, oh my god, it is just like the movie. It does have all these little drawings, and I was so excited to see them all. So the next day, I had a lot of stuff marked on my offline maps to go to, and each day I went to a different one. After that, I did go to the National Library, and I was really tired. I'm not sure if I was backpacking or what. I might have gone to the library first because I just remember being so exhausted that day. And I tried to charge my phone in one of the computers they had in the genealogy department. And for some reason, the USB slot in the computer wouldn't even charge my phone, even though I had a cord. And I tried multiple computers and I couldn't charge my phone, and I was so tired and I just left. And I never went back to that National Library. And then I realized I had been in the genealogy department and I didn't even look up my family's Irish part of our family's roots, which would have been so easy because it's set up, you just put in your name and then it tells you exactly where your family's from. And I just didn't think of it because I was exhausted and trying to charge my phone, which is so American of me to do, to have not even realized I was in the middle of a personally relevant genealogical archive because I'm trying to charge my phone. And the thing I do remember about the library was that I went to the bathroom and there was a fully upholstered chair in the waiting area of the bathroom. Like it was a super fancy bathroom. There was a yellow upholstered hardwood chair, cushiony hardwood chair just sitting not even near the sinks. The bathroom was huge, so that there was a waiting area until the bathroom, but it was completely empty. But I sat in the chair just to test it out. It was as comfortable as it looked. And then I went to the Dervish concert a couple of weekends after I got to Dublin. The concert I had bought 2.5 months previous, waiting in Morocco for. And it was amazing seeing them in person, getting to hear her voice live. It's an amazing voice, the singer of Dervish. Her name's Kathy Jordan, and I listened to their albums all the time, especially walking along the Wicklow Way. If I knew I was going to get to a pub soon, I would put on a Dervish album and listen to Kathy Jordan belt out some traditional tunes as I walked toward my next Guinness and crisps. And now I was seeing her live, and I flew from Morocco to see this band, and it was just wonderful. It was, a great experience. It was funny because, like I said, Irish people are very quiet and more reserved than Americans, as most people are. And it was a completely sit-down concert, and at points she encouraged people to get up and dance, but everyone else in the audience was 60 to 80. Everybody else was old. Maybe it's because Dervish is mostly traditional tunes, but this was an older crowd, and I was by far the youngest person at 30 years old or whatever I was. But regardless, it was a very good show that completely exceeded all of my expectations, and I was so glad that I had bought the tickets, and I had bought the ticket to Ireland, and I made the effort to get to this show because it was another defining experience. It was just, she can hit these notes, Kathy Jordan, that ring my soul like a bell. Just a fascinating, beautiful voice. Which reminds me, when I did make it down to Waterford, I met this guy. He was older than me, like 50s, and I keep thinking music producer, but I'm not sure. He was something in the music industry. And he had a similar story about a singer that rings his soul like a bell when he hears her voice. Rachel Sermani, who's this really great Irish singer. He introduced me to her music, and I still listen to it sometimes. Oh, Rachel Sermani's Scottish, not Irish. She's the Scottish singer and musician, I guess. I think she plays guitar as well. And he told me that he went to one of her first concerts ever, and then years later he saw her again, and she actually remembered him because they had had a short interaction at that first show he went to and talked for a bit, and she remembered him at another show much later, and they had another nice little chat, and then he went. But that really made an impression on him, and he loved her music anyway. So I thought that was a cool little story. And I think me and him we each had like a Guinness and a beef and Guinness pie. And it was just nice having this human, normal conversation after I'd had this long hammock camping experience and then the crazy Scottish rugby party. And I just met this guy, and we just sat and talked about music and had a nice lunch together. And I was like, I'm going to drink more. You want to drink more? And he's like, oh, I'm good for the afternoon. And in my head, I'm like, that's crazy. We're an island. We should drink more Guinness. But moderation was the wiser path to follow this afternoon. Okay, Waterford cannot be talked about without talking about the Waterford Crystal Factory, which is called the House of Waterford Crystal. And I think it's right across a river from where I was standing when I saw it first. Although I could be making that up. Let me check. It's directly across this river, so I remember seeing it from across a river in the middle of the town, and I was standing under this little alcove under a set of steps leading up to the second story of the street somehow. It was weird, but I was there and I was looking for the factory, and I looked across the tiny river that runs through the town, and there it was right across from me. And so I found the bridge and went across, and I went on one of the tours that was starting in 15 minutes. I just got lucky and bought a ticket and went. And the House of Waterford Crystal, it's the most famous glass-making company, I guess, in the world. They have the best glassmakers in the world at Waterford, Ireland, at the House of Waterford Crystal. And the tour takes you through the entire factory, and you can see all of the artisans working on whatever they're working for the most famous people in the world. Like, I saw a guy who had the boxes of his finished stuff right in front of him, and one of them was for Justin Timberlake, just his name was written across it. So he had just finished a figurine or crystalline whatever for Justin Timberlake, and there was sitting there, and there was, boxes for famous people all around. So if you see a famous, like an intricately carved little horse on a rich person's shelf one day, it is more likely than not to be from the House of Waterford Crystal. And you get to go right through the middle of all of the workshops. Some of them are cordoned off behind like walls, but then some of them you can stand a foot behind the guy blowing this little molten horse into a glass horse. Like it was a remarkable tour. It was very cool. There wasn't a ton of information beyond like very basic fundamental stuff about glass blowing and the history of the company and all that, but the treasure of it is to go in and see the artisans working on these figurines, because it's very difficult to see something like a 4-inch tall, intricately detailed glass horse and connect that to a full-sized human somehow making it from liquid glass with tools. It just seems unlikely to have been formed in any way less divine than a deity carving magic. All of those little figurines looks like they should have been magically created, but you can see these normal people using tools to make them. It's very cool. That was a great tour. Or that was a standard tour that afforded me a great experience of standing next to and watching artisans. That is one thing you should definitely do if you get to Ireland. Go to Waterford to see the Crystal Factory. And the other one that I tell even more people, everybody, the first thing I mention, it's funny I didn't come with this up top, is the Natural History Museum in Dublin. It is my favorite natural history museum in the world, and I love natural history museums. I've been to them in every country. The New York one is cool. The Dublin one is the best. And it's not bigger or anything, but they have so much on display. Animals I didn't know, like, if some of the animals were alive today or if they were prehistoric animals, and they're close enough to touch, and it's arranged so nicely that I didn't want to touch anything, and it says, like, don't touch on most of the displays. Some of them say you can touch this one, but it's arranged so well that you don't want to disrupt the organization, but at the same time, it's so crowded that you're walking between narrow rows of hundreds of different taxidermied animals and sometimes skeletons, and they're pristine. They're in such pristine condition. A lot of the taxidermied animals look alive, and they don't bother with the intricate displays that you would see in, like, the New York Museum of Natural History, where they have a mural behind the taxidermied animals, and, you know, they're arranged so that they look like there's 3 bears given 20 feet of space, and they look like they're interacting with each other. This was just one specimen of each type of animal, just as many different species as they could put together and organize efficiently, but with elegantly. It was a very elegant display of as many animals as they could possibly put into one building. And there are multiple floors to it, but that first floor with all the mammals and I don't even know how many. No, there was everything there. It was a shocking display of natural history. Shockingly beautiful, elegant, efficient display. Just really amazing to see all these animals. And there was one, I think, in Okapi. And I was like, wow, when was that one alive? Like, I thought it was a prehistoric animal. And they were like, oh, Okapis are real. They're still alive now. And I was like, what? Because it kind of looks like a donkey, but it has zebra legs and a weird snouty mouth. They're a weird little animal. But they're real, even though they don't look real. There's another snooty one that looked like a giant anteater that apparently is also real these days. And they had those, 20-foot ancient mega deer with huge moose antlers that used to exist. They had a bunch of the megafauna also. Yeah, the Dublin Museum of Natural History is the first thing I tell everybody about, the first thing I told everybody about for years when they asked me how Ireland was. I would be like, really great, like good food, surprising considering the reputation of like UK food in general. I always heard UK food was terrible, but I liked bangers and it's like sausage and gravy. Yeah, I like sausage and gravy. Stuffed mushrooms, yep, those are good too. Beef and Guinness pies and stews, yep, that sounds pretty great. And tasted great. And then immediately after I would mention, oh yeah, good Guinness, I would be like, okay, but the Museum of Natural History is overwhelming in the best way. And it's set in a very nice place. It has a bunch of grass, like big grassy field around it. And close by, there's actually, I'm not sure what it's called, but there's a dinosaur museum too. And it, again, is probably one of my favorite dinosaur museums. Because, again, they don't really mess with the display portion of it too much. Like, it's very elegantly, but importantly, efficiently displayed. Small area, but they have all these species right away on every floor, just so close to each other, but elegantly displayed so it doesn't feel cluttered. You can clearly, distinctly see each skeleton, but yeah, there's a whole bunch of dinosaurs there. So their museums of natural history are great in Dublin, and I highly recommend them. What else? I had my tin whistle. By the time I got to Cork... Oh, wait, I'm not finished with Dublin yet. In Dublin, the hostel in Dublin, there were these two blonde girls who saw me sitting in an armchair, and I was wondering what to do. And I was just like sitting there staring at nothing, and one of them asked me something, and I answered her question, where's the whatever? And then they came back a minute later, and one of them asked me if I wanted to join them to go to see a concert at a bar, or see some live music at a bar. And I don't usually do that because I really don't like American bars, but I was like, you're in Ireland, let's go see maybe it's different. And I went with them, and they were both very pretty. One of them especially, her hair, she had long, slightly curly hair, which like I'm crazy about. And the three of us got on very well, and there was Curly, and then Kooky. I'll call her Kooky, because Curly was just like beautiful and slightly vain, and then Kooky pulled out a Polaroid camera at one point and snapped our picture, just straight from her purse, and had an Instamatic photo come out, and she gave it to me, and I carried that around for years. Because it was a great memory and just such a cool thing to pull out an Instamatic camera from your purse and be able to give a memory to someone, and I really appreciated that. And I've always wanted an Instamatic camera myself because of that girl taking that picture, and I've had one before, and I do like them a lot. The one I had, you can actually make it into a sticker. You just peel off the photo as a sticker and put it somewhere after you take the picture. But anyway, I was making bad decisions, and Curly and Kooky were both great, and I liked talking to Kooky more, but Curly's hair, and Curly was like traditionally beautiful. She was just like pretty and kind of vain, and she knew she was pretty, and I kept hitting on her, and she reciprocated and made me promise to visit her in Augsburg, Germany, where she was from, after an hour of flirting with each other. And I was like, definitely, I'd love to go to Germany. That sounds great. I wasn't in Augsburg when I visited Germany the first time. And then 10 minutes later, we're still talking, and she starts saying racist things about ethnic minorities. And I was like, oh. And she had made me pinky promise to go meet her in Augsburg. And then once she started saying all that stuff, and Kooky, her friend, was like, oh, don't say that. That's not okay. And I was like, yeah, that's not okay. And she was like, I know you're not supposed to, but... And then she just kept being racist. And in my head, I was like, well, I think you can break a pinky promise. If the other person's racist, that seems like a perfectly good reason to break a promise. So I never went to Augsburg to meet her. Because I find racist people intolerable, and people of prejudice of any kind intolerable. Okay, that is the end of my Dublin recollected stories anyway. Oh, no, wait. Okay, I remembered one last thing I did in Dublin that was so much fun that I recreated multiple times. I was going to start backpacking, and at some point, I'm not sure how this happened because it was in Dublin, maybe before I went on this trek, I'm really not sure. But I knew for a couple days I was living outside, and because I had no rent to pay, I was paying $20 a day for the hostel or something. I was like, oh my gosh, I have $20 in shopping now. Like, I can go to the supermarket and buy all the good food I want instead of paying for rent because I'm backpacking. And I went and got smoked salmon lox and a 2-liter bottle of alcoholic cider, which they just sell in every supermarket and liquor store in Ireland. And, of course, a packet of cheese and onion crisps. And when I got the 2-liter bottle of cider, that was like $2. It was very cheap. I was like, wow, $2 for 2 liters of alcoholic apple cider? There's no way this can be good. And then it was like better than any American ciders like Widmer's or hard apple. What are those even called? I don't like those. Those are so sweet and crappy. This was a very dry, it tasted like real cider, even though it came in a plastic 2-liter bottle. I'm sure just because my taste buds are so warped from American sugary drinks that when I finally had real cider, even probably what the Irish consider the worst in the country, I was like, this is great. And it was great. It was so great. I took the 2-liter bottle, the lox, and the crisps out into the forest, and I set up my hammock, and there was this perfect boulder that had a huge flat area as a table, and I just set down my feast there and drank my cider and hung out next to this babbling brook with this table boulder in front of it and ate all my food and then fell asleep for a few hours in my hammock. And that started a long tradition that still goes on today of going to the supermarket and buying a bunch of delicacies and maybe beers or ciders, and then going into the forest and having a little feast and falling asleep in the hammock. Like, I love doing that to this. I'm sure I'll always keep loving doing that. How do you not love getting all the good food you want and then passing out in a hammock afterwards? It's the best. I remember I did it a few times, the same thing. I got lox and crisps and the 2-liter bottle of cider. I think at one time I got 2-liter bottles, but after I did that, I was like, that's too much. You don't need 2-liter bottles of cider. But one time I did that, and a man and his dog just showed up, and they were on a walk through the woods, and he was just like, nice. And I was like, yeah, thanks. And I just kept eating, and he kept on his merry way with his dog walking. And yeah, well, I did do that in other cities and countries. That was the first time I had a forest feast backpacking, and I'm almost certain that was in Dublin. So that should be the last Dublin story. So like I said, I walked south and I got to Waterford, which is on the south part of Ireland, but not quite as far south as Cork. It's like 50 miles north or something, northeast. And backpacking was really cool, but it was very difficult because it was raining all the time. I was constantly cold, and then I had to warm up and dry in a pub, and then keep walking all day to get to the next place. There was the huge rugby party. I had been practicing the tin whistle every day, so I was kind of mentally exhausted too. Like, I was trying to learn a new song every day from the little booklet I had. And while it was a great trip and I knew I was going to keep doing that forever, at least occasionally, I was exhausted. And instead of walking the rest of the way to Cork, I grabbed a bus down there because that Chinese girl who said I could couch surf and then found out that couch surf wasn't a dating app and I was supposed to live with her. She was going down to visit Cork from Dublin, and I hadn't seen her in a couple weeks, and so we decided to meet up in Cork. So I took a bus down there, and I can't remember what my housing arrangements were. I don't know if I was still urban camping or not. I feel like I was just urban camping, which, if you don't know, just means backpacking close or inside a city. Because Ireland is so green, so it'd be really easy to set up my hammock, and I don't remember getting any hostels there or a hotel room for me and her. But I had this Chinese half-girlfriend for a couple weeks while I was staying in Cork, and it was nice because my Chinese was still pretty good, so I could speak my Mandarin well, and we went to a pizza spot that was really good that I think I found on the first day or something, and she voice video called her parents, and they ended up meeting me over a slice of pizza, and I waved hello. We went all around Cork, just visited all the tourist spots and just all the cool spots to visit, the shopping district and all that. The library, which was very relaxing, all the bars. We went to one fort, like a old defensive fort, and they had heads on pikes, like replicas of heads on pikes that were very realistic. And there was this really interesting like Goose Lake or something we went to. It's just so peaceful. Everywhere in Ireland is so peaceful and beautiful and bucolic, even if it's in the city or near one of the biggest cities like Cork or inside Cork. And there's this great huge hill that looks over the rest of Cork, and I liked going up there and playing my tin whistle. And I met her up there a few times, and we drank cider, and I played the whistle, which was terrible. I was terrible at the tin whistle, and I still am. But she was always nice enough not to tell me I was terrible at the tin whistle, which really surprised me. And the last cool thing we did while she was still in Cork and I was there, we went to Irish step dancing dinner and a show. So we got tickets, and you go in, and they seat you. And we talked with a few of the people around us, and there was like a middle-aged lady party, and they were all more than a bit tipsy, and one of them was shocked that Xiao was from China, and she was telling everyone at the table for the rest of the dinner, like, she is from China, but in an Irish accent, so it was more cute than irritating. And we got to see live step dancing on a stage 10 feet from us. It's surrounding the stage or the dinner tables that we ate at. So they gave us really great food again, like Guinness pie and stew and whatever, just great stuff. It was kind of fancy, I remember. It was swanky. I'm thinking there was some kind of angel hair fried onion rings kind of thing. Very good dinner. And then the crew came on, and they started dancing a jig, or a step dance, I guess. And it was really impressive up close because I could see how intricate the footwork was, a lot easier than from, further back. And they had brooms, which is traditional. They used the brooms to jump over and jig about on. It was a great show. And that was our last hurrah before she went back to Dublin, because she goes to college up in Dublin. You know what? That was actually not the last one. We actually met up at a fancy hotel bar, and there was a live piano player in the corner. It felt like Eyes Wide Shut right before everybody put on the masks. It was too fancy for me. I did not look like I belonged there. Xiao kind of fit in. I found out she was from a higher echelon of society than I was later, which is probably how she knew about the live piano playing bar where everybody wore tuxedos. And I was wearing a puffer jacket with jeans. But everyone was extremely kind and polite, and I got a Guinness and a packet of crisps, and we had fun talking, and I love live music. It was a fun time. And I ended up meeting Xiao in China years later again, maybe a year later, a couple years, I'm not really sure. And we went on a couple dates and hung out, but we didn't quite ever click, not in Ireland or in China. So we stayed good friends, and it was fun to hang out with her. And I'm really glad I got to go to that Irish step dancing show with her and do a bunch of the stuff with her. Glad I got to eat pizza with her. It's just a great 2 weeks of my life with a new friend. And whenever we went to bars together or pubs, there was usually live music playing. It's one of my favorite things about Ireland. almost every single pub, I should say, has live music nearly every day. It's constantly, on any day, there is live music at somewhere going on in the city, and usually somewhere in a pub. So half the time we would go, I remember this one in particular, and we were having cider and Guinness. I think we were just having Guinness. I usually got Guinness at the pubs. I just got cider for myself in my forest feasts. And there was like these really older gentlemen, like 70, 80 years old, really old guys. But when they started playing, it sounded like lively 20-year-olds just going wild on their, but super old traditional slides and reels, like the jig music you're thinking of, that people would dance an Irish jig to. Extremely lively, and I was entranced for the entire show for like 20 minutes until they took their break. And then I looked back at Xiao and I was like, wow, and she agreed. Geez, we went to a nice hotel once too. I can't remember what the show was there. Maybe that was the step dancing thing. Oh, that reminds me, when I was infatuated with Curly in the one from Germany who was racist, who I was like, nuh-uh, and ignored after that night. We went to a local like live music, but it was at a tourist bar. So the live music band was already pretty wasted, and everybody in there was just a wasted tourist. And the lead singer of that band kept saying the same joke every time they stopped playing a song. He would say, I hope you all like that tune. Sorry we're not the Dropkick Murphys, ha ha! And everyone would laugh, and then they'd play another song, and it would end. He'd be like, that was Landon Forest? Ah, hope you guys aren't disappointed we're not the Dropkick Murphys. And then they'd play another song. And then he'd say again, like, no Dropkick Murphys here, just us. And he'd say the name of their band, which I can't remember. But he kept making that joke. And I was like, does he know we're all, like, the same people are in the bar as there were 4 minutes ago before his last song where he made that joke? And he actually came over and started hitting on Curly German. But she was, like, hanging on my shoulder, and he did the eyes, and he, like, clocked it, and he was like, oh, okay, fine. But you could tell he was using his, like, lead singer of a band mojo. And I mostly just looked like a sloppy American hobo, and he was visibly confused as to why I got to hang out with these two pretty girls. I was pretty confused by that, too, but whenever that happens, I just pretend it's completely natural for me. Well, I tried to keep this sort of timeline correcty, but I started in the middle of the story and then went back to the beginning and then at the end, and then now I've ended back at the beginning again. So, sorry about all of that, but thank you very much for listening to this, again, longer than I expected set of stories about Ireland. And you know what, since the timeline's diving all over the place, I might as well go back to before I even started backpacking again, because I did go to a bunch of museums in Ireland. And as I mentioned, I like the natural history and the that dinosaur museum. But there was a great museum that I haven't mentioned yet, the Leprechaun Museum. And I thought it would be kind of a fun, goofy, gimmicky thing to go to. I mean, I'm in Ireland. There's a Leprechaun Museum. Why not? But the strangest thing happened. I mean, first, not so strange. I met an absolutely beautiful girl who was to be the tour guide. She was the ticket booth girl, and we, like, hit it off. I made a silly joke, and she laughed, and we traded a couple nice sentences. But then the tour started, and she just walked out from the booth and took us, and I was like, ooh, she's the tour guide. That's nice. And then, for some reason, my brain recalled every single fact I had ever learned about leprechauns and ordered them as if I were an encyclopedia article. And so this girl would be giving her tour, and she'd say something like, but you know, leprechauns didn't always wear green. They used to wear a different color. Does anyone know what that is? And my brain just, like, screamed it in my head, and I was like, red. And she looked toward me kind of confused, and she was like, yes. How did you know that? And I was like, I'm not exactly sure. It just seemed real leprechaun-y. And she and everyone in the group chuckled. And she even said, all right, Kai, because I had told her my name when we were talking earlier, and I was like, ooh. And then she twirled around on her cute shoes and walked into the next room. And that happened a couple more times. And then before we even went into one of the big rooms, it was like based on a legend that I didn't remember, but like I said, my brain was just like, impress this girl with your leprechaun knowledge. You know how well that always works. And she told this story, and my brain was already telling me the question she was going to ask and the answer to it. And my ego, my personality was just like, what the heck is happening? My conscious brain did not recall this story or what my back of my brain was talking about, whatever facts it was dredging up. But I was having a fun time. So she got to the end, and then she asked the question that my brain said she was going to ask. And do you know what the farmer put on the tree to mark where the treasure was? And I was like in the back of the crowd. There's all these parents with their children and everything. And I just pipe up, it was a red sock, wasn't it? With like a hole in it. And she looked so confused. And she was like, yes. How do you know about that? Like kind of endearingly ticked off as only an Irish girl can be. And I tried to make some charming joke, and she laughed at it, and then took us into a room where they had a huge tree display, and there was like 100 red socks hung off the branches, which I looked up later as part of this legend that I must have read when I was 6 years old. And I was just waiting because I thought 20 odd years later that would impress this girl, I guess. That's why my brain saved that for this long. And one of the dads with his kid turned around to me, and he was like, wow, you two really like are getting along or have a rapport or something like that. Don't worry, I won't say anything, but are you actually like part of the tour so you can make it fun with all the jokes? And I should have just said yes, but I said something like, no, I'm not sure what is happening. My brain's remembering everything I've ever heard about leprechauns, I guess. And the guy was like, oh. And then he looked confused, which is certainly fair. And then the tour ended a few minutes later, and me and the girl, again, like traded some fun, flirty sentences. And then I didn't ask her out because I was too shy. And she seemed too cool. Whatever, it's a great memory of how perplexed I and she was at my apparent depth of leprechaun knowledge for no reason whatsoever during my appearance on what was clearly largely a family and children tour. But seeing her face in my mind when I said that stuff is so funny. I loved Ireland. I loved that city. That's maybe the last Dublin thing. Hang on. Oh, that might be the last Dublin thing, but I do have a first Dublin thing, which I forgot about, I think. I walked from the airport into the city, which, if it is at all possible, I always do when I land in a new country. And it was maybe the prettiest country I'd ever landed in, even though it was winter, everything was green and lush but fresh, not rotten, decomposing lush. Like in the Pacific Northwest, it can be kind of heavy and the ground can be too wet to walk on. I don't know, Ireland is like magical. But it was so pretty, and I was so curious about all the beers that even though it was like 7 a.m. or something, I was like, whatever, there's probably a convenience shop and I can just buy a beer and sit on the bench and chill out in a park, because I didn't want to show up to the apartment I was staying at too early. And I was like, yeah, I'll just spend the morning in a nice park on a hill somewhere, having a cider, and then head over to the apartment later. And I did that. I went to a convenience store and walked in, and they were still opening up, so there were like shutters around or like plastic vinyl coverings on stuff. And they had a few specialty ciders that were clearly expensive, and I was like, yeah. And I grabbed one of those and another soda or something and went to the front. And the lady rang me up, and then she paused and put her hands on her hips and looked at me and said, "Oh, nice try." And I said, "Thank you," because I was confused. But then she didn't do anything, and I said, okay, so do I pay now? And she said, you can't buy cider in the morning. And I was like, oh, what do you mean? And she pointed back at the plastic covering that I had moved aside that had a huge sign, like giant, in 120,000 point font that said, no liquor sales before 8 a.m. or 10 a.m., whatever it was in Ireland. And I apologized and said I didn't even see it. And she was like, uh-huh. They're fucking sass in Ireland. Pretty great stuff. Irish sass. But I think she clocked that my accent wasn't Irish. I just looked so Irish, and I was trying to buy alcohol in the morning. But I think she clocked that I was actually not Irish by the end of our interaction, and she let it go. But that's another fond memory of mine. Man, if we go back even earlier, I think right when I landed, it was 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning, something like that. And instead of walking straight through the city at that point, it was still night, and I was so tired that I put up my hammock in one of the forests nearby the airport, and I just slept until 5 or 6 in the morning before I took that walk. Ireland's so pretty. I gotta get back to Ireland, and then I can go to Scotland. Maybe that's what's coming up, folks. I hope you enjoyed these wacky tales. I liked reliving them. I liked remembering. Sometimes just talking about some of these stories, I'll have an associative memory popped up. Like that Goose Lake was so picturesque, and I never would have remembered that if I didn't talk about hanging out with Xiao and Cork. Wait, did I talk about the Goose Lake? I must have, right? There's a super pretty lake with geese or swans, and it looked like a storybook. Sorry if I didn't tell that story, but trust me, looks great in my mind. I hope you have a great rest of your day. You can talk to me at bitofarambler@gmail.com or bitofarambler on all the socials. Thank you for joining me in Ireland, and thank you for listening again. I will talk to you soon.